It was a cold Illinois night. Pravin decided to leave the party and asked a stranger for a lift. They kept driving for a while, and then Pravin went missing and later found dead in woods. Was it hypothermia case or a stranger danger situation? An accident or murder? Let's find out. Welcome to Indian American Case Files. I'm your host Smiley. Today we are discussing the story of Pravin Varughese, a college student whose disappearance and death has become one of the most debated death investigations involving American Indian student in recent history. Imagine being 19 years old, you're away from home, you're attending college, you're making new friends, planning your future, and experiencing the independence that comes with adulthood. For most students, those years are filled with excitement and opportunity. For one family in Illinois, however, those years would become marked by tragedy. A tragedy that would spark years of investigation, court proceedings, conflicting medical opinions, and a relentless search for answers. What happened during the final hours of Pravin's life? Why did authorities initially concluded that he died from hypothermia? Why did his family spend years fighting for additional scrutiny of this case? And how did a case that once appeared closed eventually led to criminal charges, a conviction, and then a dramatic reversal? This is the story of Pravin Varughese. Before we discuss the investigation, it's important to understand who Pravin was. Behind every headline is a real person, a son, a friend, a student, a young man with plans for future. Pravin Varughese was born on March 28, 1994. He grew up in a close-knit Indian American family that valued education, hard work, and family connections. His parents, Lovely and Matthew Varughese, worked hard to provide opportunities for their children and create a stable future. Like many parents, they dreamed of watching their son graduate, build a career, and create a life of his own. Friends later described Pravin as energetic, outgoing, and adventurous. He enjoyed spending time with people and was known for having an active social life. Those who knew him often remembered his sense of humor and his willingness to try new things. At the time of his death, Pravin was a sophomore at Southern Illinois University in Carbondale. He was studying criminal justice, a field that reflected his interest in law, public safety, and the justice system. For Pravin, college represented a new chapter. Like thousands of students across the country, he was navigating the challenges and opportunities that come with young adulthood. He attended classes, spent time with friends, made plans for the future, looked ahead to the possibilities that life might bring. No one could have imagined how quickly those plans would come to an end. As February 2014 began, Pravin was simply another college student focused on everyday life. But within a matter of days, his name would become known across Illinois and eventually throughout the Indian American community all over US. A night that would forever change the lives of everyone who knew him. February 12, 2014. Carbondale, Illinois. Winter has settled firmly across southern Illinois. Temperatures that night were expected to drop well below freezing. For most students at Southern Illinois University, it was just another evening. Classes were underway, friends gathered off campus, and many students were doing what college students often do, spending time together and enjoying a break from their studies. That evening, Pravin attended an off-campus party. At first, there was nothing unusual about that night. No emergency, no warning signs, nothing that suggested the evening would end in a tragedy. At some point during the night, however, events began unfolding that would later become the focus of years of investigation, court proceedings, and public debate. According to information later presented during the investigation, Pravin encountered another young man named Cage Bluton. The two men were not close friends. what exactly happened between them has been the subject of extensive legal proceedings and different interpretations. What is known is that an altercation occurred. The confrontation eventually became physical. Later, accounts described a fight between two men. As investigators worked to piece together the events of the night, many questions remained about the sequence of events and what occurred during the confrontation. According to the suspect's account, Pravin eventually left the area and ran away. The suspect later stated that Pravin disappeared into a nearby wooded area. After that moment, no verified sightings of Pravin alive were even confirmed. At that time, nobody knew this would be the last known encounter before his disappearance. As the night came to an end, Pravin failed to return home. Initially, they may not have seemed alarming. College students sometimes stay with friends or return late after social events. But as hours passed, concern began to grow. Calls were unanswered, messages received, no response. Friends and family members started realizing that something wasn't right. As morning turned into afternoon and afternoon turned into evening, the worry intensified. Pravin's loved ones began searching for answers. Where was he? Had he gone somewhere unexpectedly? Was he injured? Or was something far more serious unfolding? No one knew. What they did know was a young man who normally maintained contact with those around him had seemingly vanished without explanation. And with each passing day, hope became increasingly mixed with fear. Search efforts expanded. Friends looked for information. Family members desperately waited for news. Every phone call carried the possibility of an answer. Every lead brought hope. But days passed without a breakthrough. Then, 5 days after Pravin disappeared, searchers made a discovery that would change the course of this investigation forever. Pravin's body was found in a wooded area near the location where he had last been seen. He was only 19 years old. For his family, the nightmare they had feared has become reality. But the questions surrounding what happened that night were only beginning. The discovery of Pravin's body brought an end to the search, but it marked the beginning of a much larger investigation as authorities examined the scene and reviewed the circumstances surrounding his disappearance. They worked to determine exactly how a healthy 19-year-old college student had died. The wooded area where Pravin was found was located not far from the location where he had last been seen. Investigators began gathering evidence, conducting interviews, and reviewing the timelines of the events. As the investigation moved forward, officials reached to initial conclusion. According to the original findings, Pravin's death was attributed to hypothermia. Hypothermia occurs when the body loses heat faster than it can produce it, causing body temperature to drop to dangerous levels. Given the freezing temperatures that night, investigators believed Pravin had become exposed to the cold after entering the wooded area. Based on those findings, authorities did not initially classify the case as a homicide. For investigators, the case appeared to have a straightforward explanation, but for Pravin's family, the conclusion raised more questions than answers. From the beginning, they struggled to understand how a healthy young man could simply wander in the woods and die without additional circumstances contributing to what happened. As they reviewed information surrounding the case, they became increasingly concerned about the reports of injuries found on Pravin's body. His family believed those injuries deserved closer examination. They questioned whether the original investigation had fully accounted for everything that occurred during Pravin's final hours, and they were not willing to accept conclusions without further scrutiny. For many families, receiving answers can provide a measure of closure. But for Varghese's family, the official explanation only deepened their uncertainty. They wanted to know exactly what happened, not what might have happened, not what investigators believed had happened, but what actually happened. Determined to seek additional answers, the family took an extraordinary step. They pursued an independent review of the case. That decision would eventually change the direction of the entire investigation. As independent experts examined evidence and reviewed medical findings, new questions began emerging. Questions that would eventually attract public attention. Questions that would lead to renewed legal scrutiny. And questions that would ultimately bring the case back into the spotlight years after Pravin's death. For Varughese family, the fight for answers was just beginning. The next several years, they would become some of the strongest advocates for further examination of the case. The investigation that many believed has already reached a conclusion was far from over. As months passed, Pravin's family continued searching for answers. They believed there were aspects of the case that deserved further examination. Determined to better understand what had happened to their son, they sought independent expert opinions and additional review of the evidence. One of the most significant developments came from a second autopsy. According to the reports, independent experts identified injuries that the family believed warranted closer scrutiny. These findings intensified concerns that the circumstances surrounding Pravin's death might be more complex than originally believed. As information from the second autopsy became public, the attention surrounding the case began to grow. Media outlets covered the story, community members followed developments closely, and many people began asking whether the original investigation had reached the correct conclusion. The case was no longer simply about a missing college student who had been found deceased. It had become a debate about how the investigation was conducted and whether important evidence had been fully considered. Throughout this period, Pravin's mother became one of the most visible advocates for further examination of the case. Moms, right? She spoke publicly about her concerns. She attended hearings. She met with officials. And she continued pushing for additional review of the evidence. Years passed, but the family's determination never faded. Eventually, prosecutors revisited the case. After reviewing evidence and expert opinions, they reached a different conclusion from the one originally presented. In 2017, more than 3 years after Pravin's death, the suspect was charged with first-degree murder. The decision marked a dramatic turning point. For years, the case had largely centered on questions surrounding the cause of death. Now, prosecutors were arguing that the altercation between the two men played a significant role in the events that followed. The case that many believed had already been resolved was suddenly headed to trial. For Pravin's family, the charges represented an opportunity to have the evidence examined in the court. For the suspect, the charges meant facing the possibility of a life-altering conviction. As the trial approached, both sides prepared to present their arguments. Jurors would hear testimony from witnesses, experts would discuss medical evidence, attorneys would present competing interpretations of what happened during Pravin's final hours. The central question remained the same. How did Pravin Varughese die? And who, if any, was legally responsible? When the case finally reached the courtroom in 2018, years of controversy, investigation, and public debate would be placed before a jury. For Pravin's family, it was a moment they had spent years fighting to reach. But the legal story was still far from over. In 2018, more than 4 years after Pravin's death, a case finally reached a jury. For days, jurors listened to testimony from witnesses, medical experts, investigators, and attorneys from both sides. The prosecution argued that the physical altercation between the suspect and Pravin played a significant role in the events that led to Pravin's death. The defense changed those claims and disputed the prosecution's interpretation of the evidence. As with many complex cases, the trial involved competing expert opinions and differing interpretations of what had happened on that night Pravin disappeared. After hearing the evidence, the jury reached its decision. The suspect was found guilty of first-degree murder. For Pravin's family, the verdict represented a significant moment. After years of advocacy, public attention, and legal proceedings, it appeared that the justice system had accepted the argument they had fought to bring forward. For supporters of the family, the verdict felt like validation. For others, questions about the evidence and the legal process continued. But despite the conviction, the legal battle was not over. In many criminal cases, a guilty verdict marks the end of courtroom process. In this case, it marked the beginning of another chapter. Following the conviction, legal challenges continued. Eventually, a judge overturned the verdict. The ruling was based on legal issues related to the indictment and the instructions that have been provided to the jury. As a result, the conviction could not stand. The decision was major development. The case that once resulted in a murder conviction was now headed back into legal uncertainty. For Pravin's family, it was another difficult setback in a journey that has already lasted years. For suspect, the overturned conviction dramatically changed the legal landscape. Prosecutors then faced an important decision. They could pursue a new trial, or they could choose not to continue the prosecution. Ultimately, prosecutors decided not to seek another trial. Disappointing, right? The charges were dismissed. As a result, no one currently stands convicted in connection with Pravin Varughese' death. That outcome left many people with mixed emotions. Some viewed the dismissal as evidence that the original conviction should have never occurred. Others believed important questions remained unanswered. And for many observers, the case became an example of how difficult it can be to determine exactly what happened when key events take place without independent witnesses or definitive evidence. More than a decade later, discussions about the case continue. People still debate the medical findings. They debate the investigation. They debate the legal proceedings. And they debate whether the full story of what happened on February 12, 2014 will ever be completely understood. What remains undisputed, however, is that a 19-year-old college student lost his life. And that loss forever changed the lives of those who loved him. More than 10 years have passed since Pravin Varughese disappeared on that winter night in Carbondale. For many people, news stories eventually fade from memory. Court cases come and go. Headlines disappear. Public attention moves on. But for families who lost someone they love, time often feels very different. For Varughese family, Pravin was never simply a case file. He wasn't a headline. He wasn't a court proceeding. He wasn't a legal debate. He was their son. He was their family member. A young man whose future was taken away far too soon. Throughout the years that followed his death, his family became known for their persistence and determination. Whether speaking with investigators, attending court proceedings, or advocating publicly for additional review of the case, they demonstrated a commitment to seek answers that never wavered. Regardless of where people stand on the legal conclusions, a few would dispute the dedication shown by those who continued pursuing what they believed was truth. Pravin's story also resonated throughout the Indian American community. Many families saw reflections of their own experiences in his story. Parents who had sent children away to college, students pursuing their dreams, families working hard to create opportunities for the next generation. His death became more than a local news story. It became a reminder of how quickly a life can change, and how important it is that investigations are conducted thoroughly, transparently and fairly. Even today, the case remains one of the most discussed death investigations involving an Indian American student in the United States. Not because every question has been answered, but because many people continue to debate what happened and how the case was handled. Perhaps this is why Pravin's story continued to be remembered, not only because of the tragedy itself, but because it represents a family's determination to seek answers in the face of uncertainty. Behind every investigation is a real person, a family, a future, a life that mattered. The story of Pravin Varughese is ultimately about more than legal proceedings or conflicting conclusions. It's about a young man whose life ended at just 19 years old. A mom's perseverance, and a family that refused to stop asking questions. And it is about the case that continues to be discussed more than a decade later. Whether the full story of what happened that night will ever be completely known remains uncertain. But what is certain is that Pravin's memory continues to live on through those who loved him and through the conversations his case continues to inspire. We definitely cannot conclude what happened in this case, but we all can see the facts. Many people say that even if Pravin died of hypothermia, it was caused by the disorientation that happened due to the fight between him and Geshwithin. These observations cause people to speculate that there is still some hidden truth to the case and the justice was not done due to the negligence of the people who were supposed to serve justice. What do you think about this case? Who was at fault? How would this have been avoided? Share your thoughts in the comment section. Thank you for watching Indian American Case Files. If you found this story informative and would like to see more documentary-style investigations, please consider subscribing to the podcast. Behind every case we discuss is a real family and a real people who continue to live with the impact of this event. I'm Smiley, your host. Thank you for watching and I'll see you in the next case. Take care.